found it in trash, and now I'm restoring it. I'm not sure where it's going to put it.
Oh, okay.
Do you have any ideas of?
It was in the trash on the computer or on the?
On the computer?
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can. So you hit restore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What we do? Would it? Where was it? No idea. Origin. It said desktop. So right here.
Yeah, try it.
Is that it?
That will do.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then that. All right. I think that works, right?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Anything else you need, or you good?
Not that I know of.
Okay. And then everybody's here except one. So.
Great. Okay, my name is Chris McEvoy, and I teach in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation program over in Burton, Morgan, kind of that way from, unless I'm turned around from here. And I also teach 3 classes in Walk, the new place, and just came from there, in fact. So what I've been asked to do is talk about these topics and what's happened in the last, say, 10 years. And there's been quite a bit of movement going on during that period, and it's part of what we teach, and it's gotten very good reception from students. I would tell you that the highest concentration in terms of majors at Purdue who are taking our courses are computer sciences and related topics. The second highest is engineering. We have a ton of engineers, and we always welcome them with open arms because they're very smart, they're friendly, they're very good role models, and so we have teams, and I always assign my teams so that we have engineers on it, we have people that have experience, people that would be appreciative of a good role model, and it works out very well. So this is my, 4th or 5th year of doing this. So my background, I went to a small little school in southeastern Indiana called IU, and my dad was on the faculty, so I was a bona fide faculty brat, and he taught journalism. And I got an MBA. Well, I got a bachelor's degree and an MBA from IU, and left to go to work for General Motors, back when it was General Motors, not General Motors, biggest corporation in the world at the time. And it was a wonderful place to go and learn. They had all the money in the world, and they spent it on technology, and it was just a great spot. At that time, graduating with an MBA in something called quantitative business analysis, which was the early attempts to make sense of what do we do with these new computers that are popping up everywhere. And I can't say I learned a whole lot about what do we do with, well, I did. I learned a lot about what do you do with these computers. You use them. And so I was at General Motors for 5 years, and I loved it for 2.5 years, and I tolerated it for 2.5 years, and then I escaped. And it was just not for me, even though I had an uncle who was in a very high up position. But I never played that card because GM was nepotism was just rife at GM. So if you were the kid of somebody's friend, that somebody would take care of you. And I wasn't the kid, and not that I wasn't taken care of, but there were other people that I felt kind of came to the head of the line. And that was okay. I learned a lot, have no complaints. So anyway, at the time I left GM, I felt that I had an unfair advantage that other people might not have, or that a lot of people would not have. General Motors, 2.5 years in, brought in a completely new software development platform. And this added a lot of automation that took away the drudgery of programming, a lot of the drudgery of programming. And as an MBA graduate, I was certainly interested in numbers, profit and loss, etc., and I could immediately make a connection between all of the additional automation, faster, cheaper, and better. And so at the time, so many big companies were mired in 20-year-old software, and it was very inefficient, but these were big systems, and the bigger a computer system gets, the harder it is to take up and put it on a different platform. So starting fresh with a new platform, I had a lot of experience in how do you make these things run, and how do you convert old stuff to new. And so I had a few people that followed me out of General Motors. I didn't actively try to take them away from GM, but they were interested and I was interested, and we formed a nucleus that way. And we did not have a lot of money. I had hooked up with a partner who was 10 years older than I, which was very good because I was in my 20s. And it was good to have somebody older until I realized the guy was nuts. And so that's something that takes you a while to admit because you don't want to admit it, but he was. And so finally, I won't go into it, but finally we got him out of the company without doing substantial harm. And then we began looking for the perfect client. Would be a company that was mired in old software. They found it inflexible. The industry that we had picked to attack, because we had an opportunity in it, was the insurance industry. And they were at the time coming out with new policies. You may have heard of universal life. Back when I started doing this, that was totally new, and it was a completely different insurance policy. It was a policy that was based on earnings from interest-sensitive accounts, the investments, and they would be reflected in the value of the policy that you had, and it became a really hot item. And the companies using older software were stymied from using it because this was a fairly complex bunch of code, and we were able to install it and implement it with no problem at all. And so for a while we were kind of sailing in a blue ocean. That's where there are no sharks. The red ocean has sharks and your prey, your game. So it was really a very sweet period of time for a while. And we got a real foothold in the industry. And then, as I tell my students, that we were a startup. We did not have funding behind us. We were poor but honest. And we had very high aspirations. And what we did is we landed, I met an actuary at an insurance company in Indianapolis who needed some help, and he hired me. And it turned out he had written a software system in COBOL, which was at the time a higher level language. And he got to know me and he offered to sell it to me for $400. And it was really a complete home office management system for a smaller insurance company. Well, that fit our needs at the time very well because, you know, we were this crummy little company that didn't have something for a huge insurance company, but boy, our target was small, and small had no place to go. The automation choices for a small company were very, very tough because the major computer manufacturers at the time were names like Burroughs and Wang and Data General and IBM, of course, and RCA, General Electric. These were all companies that made multi-million-dollar computers. And IBM's about the only one in the field today still doing that. And so we were very lucky, and we could run on IBM equipment. But we were very lucky that right about that time, the mini computers came on the market. And these were computers that had modern software on them, meaning including COBOL and all that stuff. But they were about a quarter of the price of an IBM piece of equipment to do the same thing. So instead of paying $2 million, you could pay $500,000. And so that opened up the market enormously. In the US, there are probably easily 20,000 insurance companies, and life insurance companies. That's what we were dealing in at the time. And so suddenly we had all these companies that could afford to computerize now with the mini computers, and our software would run on the mini computers. And so once again, we had a blue ocean situation that lasted for a number of years. And we had markets that were delicious. And so we, as I tell students, as we went from client to client to client, we expanded the scope of what our software did, like the rings of a tree. And I said the advantage of that was that we could make it do new things for a new client and pretty much take for granted all of this that was on the inside because that had been checked out and that worked. So we were only checking out the new stuff that we added. And that proved to be in my mind, the only way to turn a small piece of software into a mammoth piece of software. When we were finished, we had about 2 million lines of code. And we knew, at that point, we were obsolete in terms of equipment and stuff. And we knew better than to sit down and try in one setting to rewrite it into too many combinations and permutations. You'll never get it done. We had two major competitors, one of whom tried. It was Ross Perot's Electronic Data Systems. They spent about $40 million rewriting their software. It was to be done in 2 years. And at the end of the 5th year, the board axed it. They just shut it down. They did not recoup any of the money they'd spent. They admitted they had made a horrible mistake. So we avoided that. Not because we were smart, because we were poor. We had no choice. We had to avoid it. So we did. So anyway, grew this company. Well, because of those unfair advantages, we were pretty hot for a while. And we ended up being financed by the bank, our bank, by an angel investor, and by a venture capital investor. These were all, for us, wonderful experiences. Today, venture capital investors kind of have a reputation of being sharks. And back then, the company we were lucky enough to find wasn't. They were there to help us, help them make money off of what we did. And that all worked out beautifully. And we had grown to about 70 million in revenues. And we had 350 employees. God help you if you ever get to that point. You know, these are all very talented people. They're all violinists. They take a lot of care and feeding. But they were great. I mean, they were great people. It was really a great experience. And so then we were approached by the second largest reinsurance company in the world, Swiss Reinsurance out of Zurich. And they had a new business model. And the new business model said to complement our reinsurance sales and our direct insurance sales, we have come up with a plan to surround ourselves with services that have something to do with insurance. They did not limit that by much. Well, for example, in the company, they had a company they had purchased from Oslo, Norway, that replaced windshields. And that to them fit in the genre of what they were trying to do. And they had the similarly dissimilar companies that nobody knew a lot about in terms of what they did and how they did it. Ended up in a 9-month period of buying, they bought 28 or 29 companies from around the world. And they had no plan for what to do with them. So suddenly they had this great influx of money they had spent, companies all over the country, all over the world, and they had no plan. How do we integrate them? How do we manage them? They picked a guy from the New York IT division and made him the president of all these companies, which he knew nothing about. I mean, he was an IT guy, and I'm sure a very competent one. But it just had failure written all over it. And I was the head of the biggest company they'd bought. And so I thought maybe they'd listen to me, but not the Swiss. Their attitude was every time, you know, they would visit frequently because they loved to come over to the U.S. And every time they'd swing by our place, we'd chat, and it was always very cordial. But whenever I attempted to say to them what I thought was not going well in our company as well as others, I'd get this, no, we're Swiss, we have this all figured out. We know exactly what we're doing, you just have to be patient with us. Okay, it's your money, you're paying me, I made my attempt, and you know, I did this a few times because I really felt like they needed to know things were not going well. Well, so this went on for about 2 years. And by the end of that period of time, I was thoroughly demoralized and not happy with the way our customers were being treated. And so we kind of came to a mutual agreement that I would leave and they would be happy if I went. And, you know, they paid me very dearly to quit being a thorn in their side. 2 years later, the board shut the whole thing down, just like at EDS. They realized that this was unfixable, it was unmanageable, and that whole layer of management was retired. You know, they were kicked out as kind of their punishment, and they wrote off. Now, this was back in the early 80s. They wrote off $750 million. I mean, this was a very expensive gamble that they lost. But, you know, one of the nice things about the insurance business, you make money no matter how dumb you are or if you're halfway good at it. And they have been extremely good at it. So, I mean, it didn't cause them to hiccup at all. So I stayed on, like I say, I stayed on for 2 years. And then about 10 years ago, it's a little more than that, I started my own consultancy. I became a SCORE mentor. SCORE is, it belongs to the Small Business Administration, and it was set up as a group that would provide free counseling to people who borrowed money from the SBA. I mean, the SBA would guarantee the loan, and that enabled people like us, which we did, this is before that, but we borrowed money from the SBA because that was the only group that would lend to us. We didn't have collateral, and an SBA loan is insured by the SBA. So that was kind of a payback in a way. And so then at that same time, I got a call from the Entrepreneurship office here at Purdue, and somebody said, your resume ended up on my desk, and I thought you might be interested in our program. I hadn't been circulating a resume, so I have no idea how it ended up there, but I was glad it did. I went up and talked to him, and I thought, this is a magnificent program. It's just, everything about it is just really cool. And so I've been doing this since 2007. And a lot has changed on the Purdue campus in that period of time. And one of the nice things about this was that I was given a lot of liberty to help design this, design what we were going to do in class. We had a lot of independence, and from my background, both at GM and in my own business, I had a lot of experience, wisdom from having done stuff and gotten smacked about. And we happened to belong to the bursar's office, not the bursar, the head academic officer. What do you call that guy? Well, anyway, he's a really nice guy. Can't remember what he's called. And we were, no, he is, they have deans within that office, but, well, whatever it is. So we are not very closely managed, which is wonderful. But certainly when we need clout, we got it. So that's wonderful too. And by not belonging to the School of Business or whatever, we attract students from all over Purdue, and we get them. We get them from every major at Purdue. So let's move on and see how much. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is business models. And back when I first came here, the furor was over business plans. And I got a lot of experience with that in SCORE because that was one of the things they were proponents of. But the fact is, a business plan makes you spend a lot of time on ancillary stuff that isn't that important. The business model is simply, how the hell do you make money? And that's what you hone. You keep honing that until you're convinced that this thing's going to work for you. And where your office is going to be located is really of secondary importance. So one of the things that came out at about this time was something called the Business Model Canvas. It was featured in a book called Business Model Generation. And what it is 9 blocks on one piece of paper, and basically you can describe any business in that layout. And the beauty of it is that it gives it to you in a way that you can look at things and compare this to that. And for example, if you were going to make a major change to something you're doing, you're going to add a revenue stream. This would basically prod you into saying, well, how is that going to affect our customer relationships? How is that going to affect our cost structure? And so it's kind of a way to be sure you touch all your bases and you don't get blindsided by something. So we're big proponents of that. And this is one kind of filled out to explain what each of these blocks stand for. And like I say, this has really become very, very popular in the past 10 years. Anybody who wants a copy of this presentation, I'll be glad to supply it to you. Here was an example of Car2Go, which is a real company. And you look at that, and then here's an example of the implications if they decided to go into a second size, larger car. So all the stuff in red is what you would have to consider to now have two sizes of cars instead of just one. I think one was a 2 or 3 person car, which certainly had limitations. And then the second one was more like a 4-door. But this is a way that you can kind of, look before you jump. Any questions about what we've covered so far? Okay, the startup environment has become very, very different. Agile development used